Buenos días, amigos. ¿Cómo están? Good morning, friends. Corina Tello, Vive de tus Rentas. We are super excited about today's episode. First off, we are in March, the month International Women's Month celebration internationally. So we're celebrating us. And therefore, we have a fabulous professional woman that I met about a month ago. We met at an investor meeting. So I love, you guys need to always be networking. It's so important. And here's a proof of it. I met a fascinating young lady. She's an attorney. She has all this amazing experience in the zoning field, if you will. As you know, real estate, although it's very simple, you buy, you make money, or you live in it and you sell, it could be a little bit complex within those little three boxes. So one thing that we don't get to learn or hear about a lot is zoning, because we are mainly dealing with the residential real estate. However, with all this experience with the commercial and this generation selling these mom and pop shops and buildings, it is so important that we get acquainted, familiar with the zoning laws and how could that affect your real estate, the value, what do you need to do or know, or where do you need to go in order to change the zoning, which is the question that a couple of my clients have right now. So I thank the attorney Katarina, whom has agreed to visit us today and answer all those questions for you to know and potentially take the opportunities that you didn't even think or thought existed. So thank you, Katarina. I really, really appreciate your time, your knowledge. I'm so excited. And thank you for all your beautiful words. So Katarina, I know that you started in the other side of the law per se, or the field, working for the county, the city, the government. So I'll let you take the space and please tell us about you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karina, for that lovely introduction. My name is Katarina Karac, and I'm a land use attorney. I started out my career on the municipal side of land use. I was a public nuisance litigation attorney on behalf of a municipality. I handled a lot of the litigation in court concerning properties that were not in compliance with zoning or other building code or code enforcement requirements. And that was my segue into zoning. Over a number of years, I realized that there was a pattern. There were a lot of people who were unintentionally violating the law, and things would change. So like for example, a site plan from 1973 would be disregarded because property changed hands. The new owner never even saw the site plan, and the parking lot would get repaved. Additions would be put on the property, and certain site characteristics would change over time. And at some point, an owner who had not even done any of those changes would get in trouble with the municipality. So that was a very common pattern of the types of violations that I saw in court. And I realized that there was a lot of unintentional kind of violations that were being created as a result of misunderstanding of lack of understanding of zoning. And in particular, what was interesting to me was to see some of the entrepreneurs who were immigrants actually, and had come to this country from places where they didn't have as robust of a zoning regulation scheme. So a lot of the things that we were talking to them about, it seemed very overwhelming and foreign concept of zoning, and some of the regulations that we had were foreign to them. And so when I exhausted experiences that I could possibly have in litigation, I went over to the private sector side and started working with business owners, real estate developers, investors, and property owners, and really focused on trying to help them get the zoning entitlements in place before they take any action, so that they are in the clear and are set up for success. And whether it's a business or real estate development or just a property owner that needs assistance, I love helping my clients and making sure that their zoning needs are taken care of. But if I may, I think, a lot of what I do is educational. I spend quite a bit of time educating people on zoning. It was, for a long time, it was a very kind of archaic, unexciting concept. If you start talking about zoning at a happy hour, people would walk the other way. Well, things have changed, and nowadays a lot of people are interested in zoning. And so as part of my educational endeavor, I always ask people, well, what do you know about zoning? And for folks who are either real estate agents and just handle residential properties, or who are in some other area of real estate but not directly connected to development, this educational piece seems to be very helpful. And zoning, in essence, came about in the United States because of nuisance conditions. So back in the day, I'm talking about late 1800s, we had slaughterhouses next to residential properties. We had manufacturing uses next to schools, noxious, toxic fumes next to people who are breathing in the toxic fumes and getting sick. So this is a very serious health problem, and land use regulations and zoning came about in direct response to that. In Chicago, the first zoning ordinance came about in 1923. So we're, 100 years into zoning. If you look at the history, that's not a long time, but within the last 100 years, there's been a lot of regulations that have come about. And that has made it particularly complicated, complex, and intimidating to property owners and business owners. And in a nutshell, what zoning is, it is the government's regulation of the character and intensity of real estate uses through police power. And how this looks like, what this looks like within a particular municipality, is that through land use planning, municipalities, and this is all across the country, they have divided up their land territory into zoning districts. So we have residential, business uses, commercial uses, manufacturing uses, and institutional uses. And historically, this is just a little history lesson. Historically, the philosophy of land use planners was to separate single-family residential uses from other uses. So it's to protect the single-family residential uses. But what has happened is that nowadays there's a lot more reflection within the policymaking circles. Elected officials, urban planners, developers, architects, environmentalists are nowadays acknowledging that when residential uses are separated from other uses, we generally end up with communities that are not connected, that are not walkable, that are not bike friendly, and that are not necessarily good for the environment. So we're living in a very interesting time right now as far as zoning is concerned.
Interesting you say that, because when you were describing the reason why zoning was created, and you mentioned those examples, I literally listed all these areas that I, at some point while I was working in commercial, thought of. For example, the Lincoln Commons, that used to be the garbage dumping place in the middle of Lincoln Park. And I always question, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? I mean, this land must be so polluted. And now it's taking forever to get clean. And of course, it's very costly to do this in order to be redeveloped. Then I thought about all these little small light industrial buildings right in the middle of all these neighborhoods, which also as a commercial broker, I used to have a couple of listings in the North Londale area that are a little bit on the abandoned side, a little bit kind of on the D neighborhood, and all these shows will hire the building to perform an episode. And so it's very intriguing, and especially what you're saying about the other one, because now the new developers are building a city within a neighborhood. So we have a building going up with all the services on the bottom to provide all those, like you said, like all those walking distance and such. And you say that that's creating a problem now as well, like before? Is it because it's overcrowding everything, or why do you say it's a challenge, that we're in an interesting situation?
Yeah, so let me elaborate. So part of the reason why we're experiencing the shift in policy right now is because there's a major demand in the market for affordable housing. And that in and of itself is driving a lot of the policy changes. The fact that there's projected population growth, and we don't have, at the current rate, we're not supporting the growth that's coming. So the growth will come. We need to house more people. And if we're not creating communities that are more dense, that are more environmentally friendly, transit oriented, that's a problem for the future generation. So right now, the policies that are in play will have an impact for many years to come.
So thank you for sharing all that. I would like to ask a question about that. So what happens? Who needs to take action here so that the government seeing this, the policies are changing to adapt to that? Is the lack of affordable housing there because there's nobody building it, nobody caring about that factor, or what's creating that lack?
Yeah, so one thing that's really fascinating is, so for a long time, zoning has been treated as a local issue, something that is dealt with on a local level. And I'm licensed in Ohio and Illinois, by the way, and I definitely pay attention to trends all across the country because I like to see and understand the trends and what's happening and how, on a policy level, what is being done. And for a long time, there was not a lot of national attention on zoning. And for the first time, as far as I'm aware, because of this national crisis surrounding affordable housing, there's national pressure to reduce red tape around permitting and zoning and to promote higher density residential development, especially affordable housing. And for the first time in a long time, the executive branch of the federal government has articulated a position on zoning, with President Biden calling for rolling back on single family residential housing. And
wow.
I think the 2023 federal budget includes $10 billion in federal grant money to state and local governments who take action and roll back on single family zoning. So the federal government can't directly impact zoning, but they're definitely incentivizing certain development, because on a national level, it's just all across the board. There's a need for more residential development, but single family housing is not, is the way that zoning ordinances have developed over time to be so protective of single family residential development. It's prohibiting more high density development, which historically has not been very favorable to the local communities. And now there's a lot of cities and municipalities that are trying to encourage more dense development.
This is truly fascinating. It really is. And as you said, not only interested in every fact, every field, every factor of life has been currently affected by all these generations and population. And it's so much going on. Thank you for sharing that. I did have a few questions. I'm sure you're going kind of talking about covering some in between. But is there anything that you could what can small person, investor, somebody that's thinking about like, oh, what does that mean to me? I have a construction company. Does that mean I can go to the government and compete with these big faults to get that money? That's probably what this is all about, right? Trying to get those funds to start developing, or do I have to find a specific land, or how do I get involved in this potential opportunity as an investor or developer?
Good question. I don't exactly know the details about how the grant money is being allocated to the states and local governments. And if that is, if the local governments and the states are giving grant opportunities directly to local developers, it's always a good idea to check with your local economic development department to see what opportunities are out there. Typically in distressed areas are some grants available or some opportunities that are available to investors that are willing to take on some risk. And every municipality is different, so it's not all across the board. It's important to get to know your local development department and build that relationship. And I know that a lot of times they appreciate if you've done other successful projects that are good examples for good work in the community. That's something that definitely puts you in a better position if you're looking at a competitive grant. But yeah, that's all I can say on that point. I wish I knew all of the things that were going on, but there's just too much. Every municipality is different.
Sure, I understand. So what if I want to change my zoning? Let's use the example of this young lady, and they own a property on a commercial. All the buildings next to this particular property are professional offices. It's in the main avenue. This is in Tampa, and this is a single family, used to be a single family house, and wants to change the zoning. But she says the other ones are already commercial. What does she need to do? What's the first step to take here?
So I'm an attorney, so I like to put a lot of words of caution. I don't practice in Florida. She would have to look at her local zoning regulations and talk to a local attorney to better understand her situation. But generally, if you're looking to change the zoning, you have to do your due diligence. That's always first step. You need to understand what zoning district your property is in. You need to understand the surrounding area, any area change and area standards that your proposed change would deviate from. So let's say if you're going from residential to commercial, there may be different parking requirements, height requirements, setback requirements. And so you would really need to do your due diligence to make sure you understand what kind of an application you would need to submit for a zoning change like that. There, we call it rezoning. So it's a zoning change from one district to another. And as part of that process, there is typically an application you have to prepare that includes your proposal, survey, site plans, a narrative about what you're proposing to do, pictures perhaps. And then once that is submitted, most jurisdictions require you to notify the neighbors. The distance varies, but typically it's like 250 feet from the property. You have to notify the neighbors. And there's usually a review process. The zoning staff will review the application, provide some preliminary feedback. If you are in a, depending on where you are, you may need to meet with your local alderman, that's typical in Chicago. In other jurisdictions, there's no requirement. There's committees that you have to go before to introduce your project and get a recommendation, and then ultimately city council would vote to approve your project. That's in a nutshell what generally the zoning project entails. And depending on, it sounds like for the individual in Tampa, if the surrounding area is commercial and business uses, there may be a very good argument for why her property's suitable for the zoning change. And perhaps it doesn't make as much sense for it to remain in a residential district. And if there's hardship, if the property had a hard time leasing or being sold, I think that can be part of that argument as to why the zoning change is needed.
Thank you. Now, let's use that example. Let's say she changes the zoning and she wants to resell. Obviously, would we be safe to assume that property would increase value just because it, in this particular case, went from residential to commercial without even touching the property per se? Like if I wanted to buy it as is as a residential, obviously it's in a price. And even though the same property, we didn't touch, we didn't do anything, would that add value to it?
Yeah, generally speaking, yeah, going from a lower intensity use to a higher intensity use that opens up more opportunities will increase the value. It's case by case, but typically, yeah, that's exactly the mindset and what typically happens. And not only that, but sometimes going through a zoning change also increases the values of the properties in the surrounding area. And the irony of that is sometimes neighbors oppose the development without fully realizing that their value may increase as a result of the zoning change. So instead of supporting the zoning change, some of the neighbors out of ignorance or fear will oppose zoning. And it's not until, later when the project is approved that they see that their values have gone up, and it maybe didn't have as adverse of an impact as they anticipated initially.
It's interesting how the emotions take the best of us sometimes, even on business decisions. I had go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add that even in the context of affordable housing, there's a lot of misconception about affordable housing decreasing property values of the surrounding area. And there has been research done by reputable companies and businesses and research institutes that shows that well-managed affordable housing development projects do not have an adverse impact on property values in the surrounding area.
And then it becomes, if you have more than 12 units, or the 5 units, it becomes a commercial building, going back again to the value of commercial versus residential. It's intriguing, interesting. But what I'm seeing, nothing to do with real estate or zoning, but what I'm seeing with the social media right now, I understand. None of us know much about anything. It's been very intriguing to watch, being exposed to all these intriguing things in the world. But thank you for sharing all this. This is such valuable information. I do have a question about, let's say, a commercial project. Oh, let's go back to the zoning situation and maybe just permit. This a client is seeking for a shopping center or a big facility, a big box. In this case, we have a former Menards, huge box, and he's trying to change the use of that as a tenant. He's only going to turn into tenant. This is a single standing building with parking, private property, obviously, and he wants to turn that into a soccer fields, indoor soccer fields, and use it as an entertaining venue and such. Do they have to go through a zoning regulation, or what would be the step there if he is not going to? Is it needed to start with? It's a big box. Do we have to tell the local officials that we're changing from a retail box to an entertaining box or and such. And maybe I want to sell beer. I don't know. Do I need to tell people about it? I mean, I understand maybe there are churches, or how do I get this box to turn into this? What are my steps?
That's a great question. So the first step is to understand what is the current zoning district. And if let's say it's a commercial district and you have a designation and density identified for that district, you want to take a close look at what's a permitted use. Each zoning district will have a list of permitted uses. And if a particular use, let's say an indoor venue or indoor soccer facility, is not clearly listed as a permitted use, you want to take a closer look at, well, if it's not permitted in this district, where is it permitted? Which other district authorizes this use as permitted? And that's part of that due diligence stage where you really try to understand the permitted uses within each zoning district. And in order to understand whether you need a zoning change, and if yes, what that zoning change would entail. And once you identify that zoning district that you want to be in, there are area standards. And this is where sometimes people get tripped up. There's parking requirements. There are building height requirements. There's a lot of different regulation setback requirements that go into play. And so, you may be compliant with your current district, but you may not comply with the proposed district. So there may be some variances that are needed in order to accommodate the use. As far as the liquor question, that is a very regulated field. It's you need to get your liquor permits in place. There's never going to be a situation where you can just sell liquor without a license. That's called a boot joint. You will get shut down real quick. So it's really important to make sure that you hire a liquor attorney, somebody who has experience going before the Liquor Commission to advocate for you, and make sure you get your liquor permit in place. And there's, business licensing too. There's a lot that goes into this. And so you want to make sure you're working with an attorney who is there, who understands the different issues and can either, if they can single-handedly handle it, great. If not, then they're an expert for whatever, or really experienced, I should say, in whatever area you need assistance with, whether it be zoning or liquor licensing or other business needs.
Thank you. So you can handle that. This is an actual client that's seeking for this. But first, let me recap on the purchase of the real estate. So what I'm hearing here is, don't get too excited about the location. Go find the venue that can cover all these most important items and then attract the people to that location. Is that what I'm hearing? Or this is something that we used to do in Matanki, that I like working for them because they were knocking on doors. This is something that I usually tell my clients: if I find a big box abandoned and no one is doing that, so I go and figure out who the alderman is of that wing, talk to that person and ask, how would you feel about having a family entertaining venue there? Could you help me get to the owner? Would you approve that facility? I know that that's not that change recently where the alderman doesn't have to really give 100% approval, but you always want to go get the okay. I don't know, here in Cook County, I think. Now, this is something that I have not practiced in five years, commercial and all this, but anyway, so that's a way that we would approach those folks, approach the folks first to figure out why is there nobody going there, because a lot of the times the aldermans or the officials or the neighbors are saying we don't want whatever the venue is fighting to get here. So that's how we would get information first. Go to the alderman and go to the economic development, figure out why that building's still there and vacant or whatever the case may be. And then maybe entice that figure to do things like that, or because those boxes are not necessarily everywhere, right? You have to be lucky to find them nearby you if that's what you want. But or, for example, I found a box. It's in the Indiana border. I think it's ideal. The commute is not as far as or further than going to any suburb here, and it's already ready to be turned into this field. So my question here is, what do I do first? Do I find the property, or do I do all the due diligence and anything that I want? What would be the easiest? What would you suggest?
That's a great question. So you're absolutely right. There are definitely two ways of going about it. You can approach it with the general idea, and then as part of your due diligence, identify potential sites, and then do some of the legwork on the bureaucracy, political side to understand how feasible is this project at each particular site, and that way kind of narrow it down. The other approach is sometimes people do see an opportunity. They want to be in a particular neighborhood, in a very specific area, and so they will do their due diligence, but they'll proceed and try to get their approvals in place for that location. And, hopefully everything works out, but in case it doesn't, then they'll turn to the other options. I've seen both approaches, and nothing wrong with either. It's just, it depends on what your goals are, what you're trying to do, and whether my client wants to help them with the due diligence on the front end and narrow down the site, or go after a particular location and zealously advocate for their use there. Either way is fine. I've handled both and gotten great results doing either. It's just a preference. There's no right or wrong answer.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you very much for all of your information, all your knowledge. I am so delighted that you accepted to be with us, and I'd love to have you back again, because again, we met at an investors meeting, and I cannot wait to share all your vast knowledge in the field, in the investing field, in all your adventures. So I would love to have you sometime soon, and maybe we can talk a little bit further about that. I don't want to put you on the spot right here. But
yeah, no.
Oh, thank you. But do share your information. Where can we find you? Where can my client, my soccer field client, find you? Give us all your website, your email address, whatever you want. Would you like to share, please?
Yeah, no. Again, Katarina Karac, Katarina, last name Karac, Karac. My firm's name is Birchwood Law, and you can find us at www.birchwood, BIRCHWOOD.law, LAW. My number is 847-414-6458. You can give me a call or email Katarina, Katarina, at birchwood.law. One of the things that's really unique about my firm is that my clients appreciate that I'm accessible. A client can book a phone call with me directly through my website. We can talk through their issue and figure out a solution for them. There's enough red tape and zoning, so I try to be very easy to work with. And I will handle as much as I can for my client without coming to them and asking them for any additional information or materials. I do as much work to make their lives easier. And every situation is different, but one thing is the same. I want what's best for my clients, and I look for the shortest and most cost-effective solution for them.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything that you'd like to add? Any advice? Any just wish for the weekend? Any positive mantra that you like to add here to just say goodbye, happy weekend?
Yeah, no, I think one thing to keep in mind, we can get so focused on our goals, and at the end of the day, thing that I know for sure is that we're all people, And whether you're facing a zoning issue or some other challenge, if you understand that all of us are more alike than we're unalike, and if you approach every person with kindness, respect, and really try to listen, most of the time, I think you can find a solution and resolve whatever conflict or problem you have. And that's all I can say.
Yeah, and with that, I also like to say, friends, don't be intimidated to call Katarina or call any attorney. Don't feel afraid and don't think it's gonna be all this money. Don't worry about anything. Just ask your questions and can go from there. But do ask, don't just do things without knowledge, right?
Right.
So,
yeah, that's usually how people get in trouble.
Yeah, because we're afraid to ask. So don't, if you want to leave comments, I'll be happy to. I'm going to be visiting clients or retailers. So I'll be happy to record questions. We will be happy to answer those. If you don't want to call, you're afraid, you don't speak English, or you do understand English but don't know how to present your question, please comment, send the questions. I'll be happy to send them to Katarina. I'm sure she can answer it for us. And what the main goal of this channel, the main goal of us getting together is for us to provide content, value, and show you that there are many ways that you can be successful at whatever you do, in this case, real estate. So with that,
Karina,
yes.
We do have an interpreter service available for those who speak Spanish or another language. And that's something that I think is very important. Sometimes the language barrier presents an added challenge, and that's something we've worked through, and we can work with folks that are not as strong in English and make sure that they're being responded to and have their questions answered.
Thank you. That's amazing. And we're recording this, but I'll be adding all this information to the bottom of the video so you can have the point of contact. And again, I'm delighted. This is the perfect meeting this particular month. I think the energy, I believe in serendipity, synchronicity, and I believe in energy, positive energy. And I am so grateful for the opportunity of the universe presenting to me challenges, and I'll take them too.
That's right.
Thank you,
Karina.
Thank you so much.
Very much.
Absolutely. And I'll be in touch with you later, but I know you have to get going. So thank you again, and vive de tus rentas. That's my slogan. You can put that in the translator thing service. Have a great weekend. Awesome.
All right, bye. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Y con eso, amigos, nos despedimos. Tuvimos una plática padrísima. Ojalá les haya gustado. Mi intención es empoderar a la gente que quiere salir adelante en el negocio de bienes y raíces, en el negocio de inversiones o en cualquier negocio pequeño. Tenemos la experiencia, tenemos el entrenamiento y tenemos los recursos. Vive de tus rentas. Buen día y feliz Mes Internacional de la Mujer. Claro que todo se puede.